The holographic transmission flickered with an ominous intensity, casting long shadows across the conference room. Dr. Elena Rodriguez leaned forward, her dark eyes fixed on the translucent image of Ambassador Zarek, a towering Centaurian diplomat whose crystalline skin refracted the light in mesmerizing patterns. Behind him, fragmented images of massive void-black ships drifted against a backdrop of stars, their silhouettes sending a chill through the assembled global leaders. The void swarm approaches. Zarek's voice resonated with a tone somewhere between a warning and a funeral dirge. Our long-range sensors have detected an unprecedented threat to all known civilizations. These entities consume entire star systems, leaving nothing but cosmic dust in their wake. Around the table, representatives from every major nation sat frozen. Some looked terrified, others skeptical, but most appeared overwhelmed by the magnitude of the supposed threat. Holographic displays showed projected invasion paths, estimated casualties, and apocalyptic simulations that seemed designed to instill maximum terror. Elena's fingers moved almost imperceptibly, tapping a complex sequence on her neural link wristband. Data streams began to populate her personal display, cross-referencing the information presented by the Galactic Confederation with historical records, astronomical data, and previous alien contact reports. Something felt off. The invasion maps were too perfect, the threat projections too mathematically precise. Years of scientific training had taught Elena that natural phenomena, especially those involving cosmic-scale events, rarely followed such clean, predictable patterns. Her research partner, Dr. Michael Chen, leaned closer. "The statistical probability of these projections is almost impossible," he whispered, his own neural link displaying a series of complex probability matrices. "Look at the harmonic resonance of the supposed void swarm's movement. It's almost algorithmic." Around them, world leaders began discussing defensive preparations. Massive resource allocations, emergency military protocols, and unprecedented global cooperation were being proposed within minutes of the presentation. The Galactic Confederation representatives waited with an unsettling patience, their multifaceted eyes reflecting no emotion. Elena zoomed in on a microscopic detail in one of the invasion maps. A subtle mathematical inconsistency caught her attention, a repeated numerical pattern that seemed deliberately inserted. It was so small that most analysts would have overlooked it, but to her trained eye it stood out like a beacon. "Michael," she said quietly, "run a quantum correlation analysis on these invasion projections. Focus on the tertiary harmonic frequencies." Her colleague's fingers danced across his interface. Moments later, his eyes widened. "Elena," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "these projections. They're not random. They're following a predetermined economic algorithm." The implications were staggering. While the global leaders continued their heated discussions about planetary defense, Elena and Michael began a silent investigation. Years of working together had developed an almost telepathic communication style. A raised eyebrow, a subtle hand gesture, a quick neural link data transfer. They were building a case that nobody in the room was prepared to hear. The Centaurian ambassador continued his presentation, detailing the supposed capabilities of the void swarm. Massive ships that could consume entire planetary systems. Energy weapons that could obliterate civilizations in moments. Resources that would be required to mount any meaningful defense. Elena noticed something else. Every projection, every threat assessment was meticulously designed to trigger a specific psychological response. Fear. Panic. An overwhelming sense of helplessness that would drive civilizations to make desperate decisions. As the presentation concluded, world leaders began signing preliminary defense agreements, massive resource transfers, unprecedented military consolidations, complete restructuring of global economic systems. And yet, Elena and Michael shared a look of profound understanding. This was not a warning about an invasion. This was the invasion. The real battle would be fought not with weapons, but with information, with understanding, with the unique human capacity to look beyond the obvious and question everything. The war had already begun, and only they seemed to realize it. The secure research facility beneath Stanford University hummed with quiet intensity. Banks of quantum computers processed information at speeds that would have been impossible just a decade earlier. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before a massive holographic display, her fingers tracing intricate data patterns that seemed to dance and shift with each touch. "We're missing something," she muttered, more to herself than to Michael, who was hunched over a secondary console. Their team had grown quietly over the past weeks. Experts from diverse fields, economists, mathematicians, communication specialists, and data analysts, had been carefully recruited. Each had been chosen not just for their expertise, but for their ability to think beyond conventional boundaries. Dr. Arya Patel, a brilliant economic forensics expert, approached with a stack of encrypted data drives. "The resource allocation patterns are fascinating," she said, her voice betraying a mix of excitement and concern. "Every major galactic civilization has been consistently redirecting approximately 37.6% of their total economic output into this unified defense fund." Michael looked up, his eyes narrowing. That's not a natural economic distribution. It's too precise, too consistent across completely different economic systems. The team had established a secure communication network that operated entirely outside traditional channels. Encrypted quantum communications, constantly shifting transmission frequencies, and a distributed network of independent researchers allowed them to piece together a complex puzzle. Elena pulled up a series of historical economic reports from various alien civilizations. Each showed a remarkably similar pattern of resource redirection following first contact with the Galactic Confederation. The consistency was uncanny, almost mathematical in its precision. "It's like a perfect economic parasite," Dr. Ramirez, a sociological economist, observed. "Each civilization is being slowly drained, but in a way that doesn't trigger immediate alarm." A new message flashed on Elena's secure communication interface. It was from Dr. Jun Wong, a researcher stationed at a deep space communication array in the Australian outback. The message was brief but intriguing. "Found something in the communication harmonics. Not natural, definitely engineered." Elena's team began to reconstruct the communication patterns used by the Galactic Confederation. They discovered something extraordinary, a subtle form of linguistic manipulation embedded deep within translation algorithms. Each translation was subtly designed to trigger specific emotional and psychological responses. "It's communication as a weapon," Michael explained, pulling up complex linguistic analysis charts. "Not just translation, but psychological conditioning. Every interaction is designed to maintain a specific state of fear and compliance." Dr. Patel brought up a series of economic projections. "Look at the long-term outcomes. If these resource redirections continue for another 2 decades, most developing civilizations will be economically crippled. Their entire economic infrastructure will be hollowed out." The pieces were starting to come together. This was not a potential war. This was an ongoing economic conquest, carefully disguised as a defensive strategy. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Liu, a quantum communication specialist, discovered subtle encoding within the Confederation's threat assessments. Mathematical patterns that repeated with impossible precision, hidden so deeply that they would be invisible to most analysis systems. These aren't just communications, Liu explained, her fingers dancing across multiple holographic interfaces. These are instructions, economic directives disguised as threat assessments. Elena understood the implications immediately. The Void Swarm wasn't a potential threat. It was a carefully constructed narrative, a mechanism for control. Outside the research facility, the world continued to prepare for a war that didn't exist. Military budgets were being expanded. Economic systems were being restructured. Entire societal frameworks were being reshaped by fear. But inside this small, secure facility, a different war was being fought. A war of information, of understanding, of revealing the truth. "We need a plan," Elena said, looking at her team. "We can't just expose this. We need to dismantle the entire system." The team looked back at her, a mixture of determination and excitement in their eyes. They were no longer just researchers. They were humanity's first line of defense against a threat far more insidious than any alien invasion. The real battle was just beginning. The Global Economic Summit in Geneva had always been a showcase of international cooperation. This year, it was something else entirely. Holographic displays flickered with complex financial projections, each nation's representative carefully tracking the astronomical costs of preparing for the supposed galactic threat. Dr. Arya Patel sat in the observation gallery, her neural link quietly collecting and analyzing every financial transaction, every whispered conversation. To the untrained eye, the summit appeared to be a model of collaborative defense. To her, it was an intricate dance of economic manipulation. "Look at the resource allocation patterns," she whispered into her quantum communicator, speaking to Elena and Michael back at their research facility. "The Confederation has created a perfect economic trap." Each civilization was being asked to contribute increasingly large percentages of their gross planetary product to the Unified Defense Fund. The numbers were carefully calculated, just enough to cause strain, but not enough to trigger immediate rebellion. A death by 1,000 economic cuts. Dr. Ramirez, seated next to Arya, leaned in quietly. "It's a masterpiece of economic engineering," he muttered. "They've created a threat that requires constant preparation, but never actually materializes." The Confederation's economic advisors moved between national representatives with practiced ease. Tall, crystalline beings with multifaceted eyes that reflected no emotion, they presented seemingly irrefutable data about the approaching Void Swarm. Economic projections showed that only through massive coordinated spending could civilizations hope to survive. Arya's neural link began to compile a different story. She traced the flow of resources, watching how money moved through complex financial networks. Each transaction left a trace, each movement a clue to a larger pattern. "The fund doesn't just collect resources," she reported to her team. "It's actively redistributing them to specific sectors controlled by Confederation-aligned corporations." Back at their research facility, Michael began overlaying Arya's financial data with their previous communication and linguistic analysis. A horrifying picture began to emerge. The economic system was more than just a method of control. It was a carefully designed machine for extracting resources and maintaining a specific power structure. "They've turned fear into a renewable economic resource," Michael observed, his fingers moving rapidly across holographic interfaces. "Each civilization is paying for its own subjugation." The summit continued, with representatives from dozens of planetary systems discussing defensive strategies. massive shipbuilding projects, advanced weapons research, communication infrastructure improvements. Each initiative seemed reasonable in isolation, but together they formed a pattern of systematic economic drain. A Centaurian economic advisor approached the human delegation, its crystalline form shifting with subtle bureaucratic confidence. "Your contributions are crucial," it stated, its translator rendering the words with a mix of urgency and reassurance. "Every resource invested brings us closer to preventing total destruction." Arya watched the interaction, her neural link capturing every nuance. The linguistic patterns were familiar now, subtle emotional manipulation embedded within seemingly neutral language. "The threat doesn't need to be real." Elena's voice came through the quantum communicator. "It only needs to be believable enough to maintain the system." As the summit continued, Arya began to map out the economic connections. Confederation-aligned corporations were present in every major economic sector across multiple planetary systems. Defense contractors, communication infrastructure providers, resource extraction companies, each one strategically positioned to benefit from the ongoing state of perpetual preparation. Dr. Ramirez pulled up a series of long-term economic projections. "If this continues," he said quietly, "most developing civilizations will be economically hollowed out within 2 generations. Their entire economic infrastructure will be reduced to a system of perpetual debt and preparation." The true brilliance of the system was its subtlety. No single civilization could see the entire picture. Only by bringing together data from multiple sources could the full extent of the manipulation be revealed. As the summit concluded, Arya sent a compressed data package back to the research team. Thousands of financial transactions, communication logs, resource allocation patterns. Each piece a small part of a much larger puzzle. The economic war was already happening, and most civilizations didn't even realize they were under attack. "We need a plan," Arya whispered, watching the Confederation advisors move smoothly between national representatives. "We need to show everyone the truth." The quantum communication laboratory buzzed with an electric tension. Dr. Jun Wong moved with calculated precision, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that most would consider incomprehensible. Decades of research in deep space communication had prepared her for this moment, a breakthrough that would change everything. "We've found it," she whispered into her secure quantum communicator, her voice trembling with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The communication algorithm she had developed was unlike anything in existing scientific literature. It could decode the subtle manipulations hidden within the Galactic Confederation's transmission networks, layers of linguistic and psychological encoding that had gone unnoticed by every other civilization. Back at the Stanford Research Facility, Michael and Elena leaned in close to the primary display. The data stream Jun was sending was unlike anything they had ever seen. Mathematical patterns that shifted and reformed, communication structures that seemed to breathe and change with each millisecond of analysis. "It's not just a language," Michael observed, his fingers tracing the complex data patterns. "It's a control mechanism. Every transmission is designed to trigger specific psychological responses." Elena pulled up comparative linguistic analyses from previous alien communications. The differences were subtle but profound. Where most communication systems were designed to transfer information, these transmissions were engineered to manipulate perception, to maintain a specific emotional state of fear and compliance. Jun's algorithm began to break down the layers of encoding. What had appeared to be straightforward communications revealed themselves as intricate psychological weapons. Each transmission was a carefully crafted piece of emotional engineering, designed to keep civilizations in a perpetual state of anxiety. They're not just communicating, John explained through the secure channel. They're conditioning. Every message is a psychological intervention. The implications were staggering. The Galactic Confederation had transformed communication into a tool of systematic control. Languages were no longer just methods of information exchange. They were instruments of manipulation. A breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. Dr. Aisha Khan, a linguist specializing in computational communication theory, discovered something extraordinary. The transmission patterns contained recursive linguistic structures that could subtly reshape cognitive patterns over time. It's like a slow-acting cognitive virus, Aisha explained, her holographic displays showing complex linguistic DNA. Each transmission slightly rewrites the recipient's perceptual framework. The team began to map out the full extent of the communication manipulation. It wasn't just about the void swarm narrative. It was a comprehensive system of psychological control that had been refined over generations. Elena pulled up a series of historical communication records from various alien civilizations. The patterns were unmistakable. Each society showed progressively more risk-averse behaviors, more willingness to surrender economic and political autonomy, more fear of the unknown. They've been doing this for centuries, Michael said, his voice a mixture of awe and horror, slowly conditioning entire civilizations to be compliant. The quantum communication breakthrough gave them something unprecedented, a way to not just understand the manipulation, but to potentially counter it. John's algorithm could decode the hidden layers of communication, revealing the true nature of the Confederation's messaging. Dr. Rodriguez understood the magnitude of their discovery. This was more than just an academic breakthrough. This was a potential key to liberating multiple civilizations from a system of subtle psychological control. We need to create a counter-communication network, Elena said, looking at her team. Something that can help other civilizations see through the manipulation. The challenge was immense. They would need to develop communication technologies that could penetrate the Confederation's carefully constructed transmission networks. Technologies that could reveal the truth without triggering defensive responses. As the team worked, the first prototype of their counter-communication system began to take shape. It wasn't just a technological solution, it was a method of revealing truth. The real war would be fought with information, with understanding, with the unique human capacity to see beyond the obvious and challenge fundamental assumptions. Outside their secure facility, the world continued to prepare for a war that didn't exist. But inside, a different battle was being waged, a battle for truth, for understanding, for the fundamental right of civilizations to see reality clearly. The research and development complex stretched across a remote region of the New Mexico desert, a testament to human innovation and determination. Massive solar arrays reflected the intense sunlight, while underground facilities hummed with quantum computing power that would have been unimaginable just a decade earlier. Dr. Michael Chen stood before a holographic display, watching as their latest technological prototype took shape. This was more than just a communication system or an economic analysis tool. It was humanity's most sophisticated weapon against the Galactic Confederation's manipulation. Adaptive Quantum Resonance Network coming online, announced Dr. Samira Rodriguez, no relation to Elena, but equally brilliant. Her fingers moved with practiced precision across multiple interface systems. Initial calibration shows promise. The technology they were developing was revolutionary, a communication and detection system that could not only decode the Confederation's manipulative transmissions, but also create adaptive counter-frequencies that would help other civilizations recognize the psychological conditioning. Elena walked into the main research hub, her neural link already interfacing with the complex systems around her. "Status report," she said, more a statement than a question. Michael pulled up a series of holographic displays. "We've developed a multi-layer detection system. It can identify the psychological encoding in communications, translate the true underlying messages, and generate protective cognitive filters." The team had brought together experts from seemingly unrelated fields. Quantum physicists worked alongside linguists. Communication specialists collaborated with economic analysts. Neuroscientists partnered with advanced computer engineers. Each brought a unique perspective to the challenge of understanding and countering the Confederation's control mechanisms. Dr. Kai Nakamura, a specialist in advanced cognitive systems, demonstrated their latest breakthrough. "Watch this," he said, activating a simulation. A complex transmission from the Galactic Confederation appeared on the main display. As it played, their system began to peel back layers of psychological encoding, revealing the manipulative structures beneath. "It's like watching a magic trick being revealed," Samira observed. "The illusion falls apart once you understand the mechanism." The technological challenge was immense. They weren't just creating a communication tool. They were developing a system that could help civilizations recognize and resist psychological manipulation. "We need something that can adapt," Elena explained to the team. "The Confederation will try to modify their communication systems once they realize we're developing a countermeasure." Their solution was elegantly complex. An adaptive quantum communication network that could continuously evolve, learning and adjusting to new manipulation techniques in real time. It wasn't just a static defense system. It was a living, learning technology. Dr. Chen pulled up a complex set of algorithmic projections. "Our initial tests show a 94.7% effectiveness in penetrating and decoding manipulative communication structures," he reported. "But more importantly, the system can help recipients develop critical thinking mechanisms to recognize future attempts at psychological conditioning." The facility was more than a research center. It was a fortress of human intellectual resistance. Layers of quantum encryption, adaptive communication systems, and advanced cognitive filtering technologies were being developed simultaneously. A breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. Dr. Aisha Khan discovered a way to embed cognitive resilience markers within their communication system. These weren't just decoding mechanisms. They were tools for helping other civilizations develop immunity to psychological manipulation. "We're not just revealing the truth," Aisha explained. "We're teaching other civilizations how to recognize manipulation." Outside, the world continued to prepare for a war that didn't exist. Military budgets expanded. Defense systems were constructed. Fear continued to be a primary economic and political driver. But inside this facility, a different kind of preparation was happening. A preparation based on understanding, on critical analysis, on the fundamental human capacity to question and challenge. Elena looked at her team, a diverse group of researchers from around the world, united by a single purpose. They were developing more than a technology. They were creating a method of liberation. "We're ready for the next phase," she said quietly. The real battle was about to begin. The diplomatic chamber was a marvel of interstellar architecture. Crystalline walls stretched impossibly high, creating a space that seemed to defy conventional physics. Representatives from hundreds of planetary systems sat in carefully arranged tiers, their various physiological forms a testament to the diversity of galactic civilization. Ambassador Zarek of the Galactic Confederation stood at the central podium, his crystalline form reflecting light in mesmerizing patterns. Humanity must be held accountable, he declared, his translator rendering the words with calculated precision. Their refusal to comply with defensive protocols threatens the entire galactic community. Elena Rodriguez watched the proceedings from a secured observation deck. The confrontation had been inevitable, but the scale was more dramatic than even her team had anticipated. The Confederation's response was swift and multifaceted. Economic sanctions materialized within hours of their initial challenge. Communication networks began to restrict human access to galactic information systems. Diplomatic channels froze, with most civilizations too terrified to be seen supporting humanity's stance. They're implementing a complete isolation protocol, Michael Chen observed, tracking the rapidly changing global communication patterns. Classic control mechanism, cutting us off to prevent our message from spreading. But humanity had prepared for this moment. Dr. Jun Wong's quantum communication network sprang into action. Their adaptive transmission systems began to bypass traditional communication restrictions, creating encrypted channels that could slip through the Confederation's blockades like quantum ghosts. "We're not just defending," Elena told her team. "We're going on the offensive." The first wave of their counterattack was informational. Carefully crafted communication packages began to penetrate the communication barriers. These weren't simple messages, but complex informational structures designed to trigger critical thinking in receiving civilizations. Dr. Aisha Khan had spent months developing these communication packages. Each was a sophisticated blend of linguistic, psychological, and cognitive triggers. They were designed to help other civilizations recognize the manipulation they had been subjected to. The Confederation's response was immediate and brutal. Economic pressures intensified. Global communication networks that relied on Confederation infrastructure began to experience technical difficulties. Trade routes were subtly redirected. Financial systems started to show signs of strain. But humanity had anticipated this as well. A network of alternative economic and communication systems had been quietly developed. Decentralized technologies that could operate independently of the Confederation's infrastructure. Quantum communication relays. Adaptive economic platforms. Resilient technological ecosystems. "They're trying to isolate us," Samira Rodriguez said, monitoring the global economic systems. "But they don't understand how adaptable we are." The confrontation played out on multiple levels. Diplomatic chambers became battlegrounds of information. Economic systems became weapons. Communication networks transformed into complex intelligence platforms. Ambassador Zarek's accusations became increasingly desperate. "Humanity threatens the safety of all civilizations," he proclaimed, his crystalline form shifting with agitation. Their refusal to acknowledge the void swarm puts everyone at risk. But the carefully constructed narrative was beginning to crumble. The communication packages designed by Elena's team were working. Subtle cracks appeared in the Confederation's information control. Other civilizations began to ask questions. Critical analysis began to spread like a cognitive virus. Dr. Kai Nakamura tracked the psychological impact. "We're not just providing information," he explained. "We're teaching other civilizations how to think critically about the information they receive." The Confederation had never faced a challenge like this. They were designed to control through fear and economic manipulation. But humanity had discovered something more powerful, the ability to spread understanding. As the diplomatic confrontation reached its peak, Elena understood that this was more than just a battle against the Galactic Confederation. This was a fight for the fundamental right of civilizations to understand their own reality. "We're ready for the next phase," she told her team quietly. The real war was just beginning. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council gleamed with millennia of architectural history. Crystalline walls rose impossibly high, embedded with holographic memories of countless galactic gatherings. Today, those walls would bear witness to something unprecedented. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood alone at the center of the chamber, surrounded by representatives from hundreds of planetary systems. Her presence was both a challenge and a beacon of hope, a single human facing the entire machinery of galactic governance. "The Void Swarm is a fabrication," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "Every piece of evidence we have demonstrates a systematic process of economic and psychological manipulation designed to control developing civilizations." The holographic displays behind her came to life. Decades of carefully compiled research materialized: economic flowcharts, communication analysis, psychological manipulation patterns. Each projection told a piece of a complex story of institutional deception. Ambassador Zarek, representative of the Galactic Confederation, attempted to interrupt. But the communication systems Elena's team had developed prevented his transmission from breaking through. For the first time, the Confederation found itself unable to control the narrative. Dr. Michael Chen's communication algorithms worked in perfect synchronization. Every attempt to disrupt the presentation was neutralized, every counter-argument automatically decoded and rendered transparent. The evidence was comprehensive. They showed how the Void Swarm threat had been constructed. Economic analyses revealing resource extraction patterns. Communication algorithms demonstrating psychological manipulation. Historical records showing consistent exploitation of younger civilizations. Mathematical models proving the statistical improbability of the threat. Dr. Arya Patel presented the economic evidence. Holographic projections tracked resource flows, showing how civilizations had been systematically drained through the defense fund. The numbers were irrefutable, a perfect mathematical exposure of the Confederation's economic parasitism. Dr. Jun Wong demonstrated the communication manipulation. Her quantum analysis revealed layers of linguistic encoding designed to maintain fear and compliance. Translation algorithms that weren't just converting language, but actively reshaping cognitive perceptions. The chamber grew silent. Representatives from various planetary systems began to realize the extent of the manipulation they had been subject to for generations. "This isn't just about humanity," Elena continued. "This is about every civilization's right to understand its own reality. The Confederation has been maintaining a system of control through manufactured fear." Dr. Aisha Khan's linguistic analysis showed how communication systems had been subtly redesigned to prevent critical thinking. Transmission patterns that acted like cognitive viruses, slowly eroding independent thought across multiple civilizations. The Confederation's defenses began to crumble. Their representatives found themselves unable to generate counter-arguments. The quantum communication systems developed by Elena's team were systematically neutralizing their attempts to manipulate the narrative. Holographic displays showed the true nature of the supposed Void Swarm. Mathematical models proved it was a statistical impossibility. Astronomical data demonstrated the fundamental impossibility of the threat's described characteristics. "We're not asking you to believe us," Elena said. "We're providing you with the tools to verify for yourselves." The breakthrough was more than just exposing a lie. It was providing civilizations with the intellectual tools to recognize manipulation, critical thinking algorithms, communication analysis systems, economic transparency mechanisms. Ambassador Zarek's crystalline form began to fracture, not physically, but metaphorically. The carefully constructed narrative of fear and control was collapsing under the weight of documented evidence. Representatives from various planetary systems began to communicate, not through the Confederation's controlled channels, but through the open communication networks humanity had developed, sharing information, comparing experiences, recognizing their shared manipulation. Elena understood this was more than a moment of revelation. This was a fundamental transformation of galactic power structures. The real threat was never an external enemy, she concluded. The real threat was the system of control that prevented civilizations from understanding their own potential. As the presentation concluded, the chamber was silent, not from fear, but from the dawning realization of a profound truth. The war was over, and humanity had won, not through violence, but through understanding. 6 months after the grand revelation, the galaxy looked fundamentally different. The research facility in New Mexico had transformed into a collaborative center for interstellar understanding, hosting representatives from hundreds of planetary systems. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the window of the main conference hall, watching a diverse group of alien researchers work together. What had once been a secret research project was now the epicenter of a galactic renaissance of critical thinking. "We're not just sharing information," she told Dr. Michael Chen, who approached with a stack of collaborative research proposals. "We're teaching a new way of understanding." The Galactic Confederation's power structure had completely collapsed, not through violent revolution, but through systematic exposure of its manipulative mechanisms. Civilizations that had been economically and psychologically controlled for generations were now rebuilding their societies with newfound autonomy. Dr. Arya Patel's economic reconstruction team had developed adaptive economic models that helped planetary systems rebuild their financial infrastructures. These weren't just replacement systems. They were dynamic platforms that emphasized transparency, individual agency, and collaborative development. The old system was designed to maintain fear, Arya explained during a global conference. Our new economic models are designed to foster growth, innovation, and mutual understanding. The communication technologies developed by Dr. Jun Wong had become a universal standard. Quantum communication networks now emphasized cognitive resilience, helping civilizations develop critical thinking mechanisms alongside translation capabilities. Dr. Aisha Khan's linguistic research centers were establishing new communication academies across multiple planetary systems. They weren't just teaching languages. They were teaching how to recognize psychological manipulation, how to think critically, how to understand the nuanced layers of communication. The transformation wasn't just technological or economic. It was fundamentally cultural. Planetary systems that had been isolated and fearful began to reach out, share resources, collaborate on scientific and cultural exchanges. The fear that had defined intergalactic relations for generations was being replaced by curiosity, understanding, and mutual respect. "We're not trying to create a unified galactic system," Elena explained during a strategy session. "We're trying to create a framework that allows each civilization to develop according to its own potential." The research facility had become more than a research center. It was a beacon of hope, a place where different civilizations could come together to understand, to learn, to grow. Dr. Kai Nakamura's cognitive development teams were working on advanced educational models, not just for humans, but for multiple species. They were developing learning systems that emphasized critical thinking, emotional intelligence, and adaptive reasoning. "The greatest weapon against manipulation is understanding," Kai would often say. "Not just intelligence, but the ability to question, to analyze, to see beyond the surface. The Void Swarm narrative had completely unraveled. Astronomical research teams had conclusively proven the mathematical impossibility of the threat. What had once been a source of terror was now a case study in institutional manipulation. Representatives from civilizations that had been most deeply controlled began to share their experiences. Support networks formed. Healing began. Dr. Samira Rodriguez led a team developing psychological recovery programs. They weren't just helping civilizations understand what had happened. They were helping them rebuild their sense of agency, their belief in their own potential. Elena reflected on the journey. They had started as a small team in a secure research facility, challenging a narrative that seemed insurmountable. Now they were guiding a galactic transformation. "We didn't win through force," she told the assembled researchers. "We won by providing the tools of understanding, by showing that critical thinking is the most powerful technology any civilization can develop." The final report from the Galactic Reconstruction Council told a remarkable story. Hundreds of planetary systems were experiencing unprecedented growth. Economic systems were becoming more dynamic. Communication was becoming more transparent. Civilizations were rediscovering their unique potential. As the sun set over the New Mexico desert, casting long shadows across the research facility, Elena understood that their work was far from over. This was just the beginning of a new chapter in galactic history. A chapter written not with weapons or threats, but with understanding, curiosity, and the fundamental human capacity to see beyond the obvious.